Oh, she's so beautiful. It is my turn tonight. This is Folktale by Esther. The Federal General Hospital was a large, sprawling institution that served the public around the clock. By day, it was a place of healing, hope, and puzzle, but at night, it was something else entirely. The building, once filled with chatter and the home of medical missionary, now carried on heavy silence. In the early hours of the morning, the hospital felt less like a medical institution and more like an ancient tomb. I see it carried the stories of the countless souls who passed through the doors. For Musa and E, both cleaners on the night shift, the hospital was both a workplace and a place of fascination. They worked long hours sweeping and mopping the white H-ways, pushing cards through the maze of wards and treatment rooms. But it wasn't the cleaning that intruded them, it was the forbidden territory that beckoned. That territory was the mug. Their friend Benga, the Morchin, had made the mug his domain. A man of mystery and dark humor, he had a fascination with death that bothered an obsession. He would often tell M and N stories about the bodies he walked with, and though the stories were mab, they couldn't help but be intruded. So every night after finishing their rounds, they would sneak into the mug, drawn by their shed curiosity. One evening, as they approached the mug, Bina was waiting for them. He had a white grin on his face, a gleam in his eyes.
Bigger.
You won't believe
way
who is
bigger.
on the table tonight.
If
he
we're
said,
always the
his
most
voice filled
sensitive
with
of the two.
excitement. Musa raised an eyebrow. Another politician? A big-time pastor? Benga truckled. Bigger. Way bigger. If, always the most sensitive of the two, was immediately interested. Who, he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Do you know Helen Duke, right? Benga asked, practically bowing on his heels. Helen Duke? If's eyes widened. The actress from Shadows of Pain? The one and only, Benga confirmed, pulling the heavy mug door open. She is here on the table. The two cleaners exchanged glances. Helen Duke had been a household M, a talented actress who had won numerous awards, including Best Actress the year before. She had been at the peak of her career when tragedy struck, a car crash that had taken a life just a day before. M and If followed were inside. The Mo smelled faintly of antiseptic, the cold, sterile making their breath visible. As they stepped closer to the table, there she was, a face covered with pristine white sheet. She's beautiful, If whispered, a voice barely audible. Even in death, Musa murmured. She was like that in life too, but Dad doesn't care about Bay. Her body came in like a cold piece of heart. Musa felt a shiver run down his spine as he stared at the actress's face. How did she die? He asked quietly. A car accident, Benga replied. She went off the bridge last night. The rescue team found her hours later, but by then, it was too late. A fine closer, eyes fixated on the actress's face. She doesn't look dead. That's how it is with celebrities, B said with the GM. They preserved their beauty for as long as possible, even in death. Minutes passed in a harsh silence as the trial stood around the body. The hair grew colder, and a strange feeling of unease continued to creep in. The light was flickered, casting dark shadows that seemed to puce along the walls. You guys feel that? Musa asked, his voice unsteady as he rubbed his hands toward of the crippling chill. Bard, trying to sound confident, shivered slightly. It's just the M. It's always cold in here, nothing to worry about. If, face still staring at Ellen's face, felt an unfamiliar sensation washing over him. It was as though he wasn't just looking at a body but staring into the eyes of someone who's still alive, someone who wasn't ready to leave this world. Helen looked down at her hands, confused. She touched her own face as if to confirm she was truly alive. No, I was in my car, then the water. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dead. Benga, still in disbelief, approached her slowly. You can't be alive. The coroner signed off on you. Ellen's gaze hardened. Clearly, he was wrong, she said with frustration, her hands shaking. Suddenly, the door to the mall creaked open, and a security guard stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. What's the noise? He froze, his eyes wide with shock at the sight of Ellen sitting upright. The guard dropped his flashlight, which clattered to the floor, and without a word, turned and bolted down the hallway. IFA grabbed Musa's arm. "We have to help her. She can't stay here." "What do you mean, help her?" Musa snapped, panic rising in his voice. "What are we supposed to do? We're not even supposed to be here." Helen, her voice rising with desperation, swung her legs off the table. "I need to get out of here. Please, you have to help me." Benga stood motionless, his mind racing. "If anyone finds out about this, if we're caught, forget your job." IFA interrupted, his voice piercing. "She's alive. We can't just leave her here to be locked back in the mug." Helen looked at them, her eyes pleading. "Please, you have to help me." Just as Benga was about to respond, the lights above them flickered, then went out entirely. The room was plunged into darkness. A low, guttural groan filled the space, seeming to come from the walls themselves. "What the hell was that?" Musa whispered, his voice trembling. IFA's breath caught in his throat. "There's something in here with us." The temperature in the room dropped drastically. It was as though the air had turned to ice, freezing them all in place. Helen's face twisted with fear as she grabbed Benga's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "You have to get me out of here, now." Before anyone could respond, the stretcher, once empty, let out an ominous creak. The metal frame groaned as if something were climbing onto it. Musa glanced at the others, his mind racing with terror. Something is here. Something that wasn't here before. IFA's voice shook. "What do we do?" "Stay close," Benga whispered, his heart pounding. "We need to get out of here before whatever's in here gets to us." Helen, her face pale, looked around. "It followed me. I don't know what it is, but it's here with me now." They could hear a faint, hair-scratching sound, like claws scraping against metal, coming from the corner of the room. The air grew thicker, darker, as though something was watching them from the shadows. Benga reached for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle jiggled in his hand, but the door remained locked. Panic set in. "Something's blocking the door," Benga said, fear creeping into his voice. The mug door refused to budge, no matter how hard Benga yanked at it. Panic sank into the group as the scratching sounds grew louder. It was no longer just coming from the corner of the room, it was surrounding them. IFA clutched Musa tightly. "What's happening? Why won't the door open?" Benga's voice was shaking as he replied, "It's not locked, it's like something doesn't want us to leave." Helen stood trembling, her arms wrapped around herself. This started after the accident. I saw something in the water. It wasn't a dream. It was real." "What did you see?" Musa asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Helen hesitated, her eyes darting to the dark corners of the room. "I don't know what it was, but it had eyes that burned like fire. And when I woke up here, I felt it. It's still with me." The lights flickered back on for a brief moment, revealing the group huddled near the table. But in that brief flash of light, something moved in the shadows, something tall, hunched, and otherworldly. The group froze as the light blinked out again, leaving them in complete darkness. The air was thick with an oppressive presence, and the scratching sound grew louder, now accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through their chests. Musa's breath came in short gasps. "What was that? Did anyone see that?" "I saw something," IFA whispered, his voice trembling. "It was tall. It was moving." Helen clutched her arms tightly, her teeth chattering. "It's here. I know it's here. It followed me." Benga, still gripping the door handle, muttered under his breath. "This isn't real. This can't be real." He yanked at the door again, but it wouldn't give. "Why won't this damn door open?" The growl deepened, resonating from every corner of the room. It felt as though the walls themselves were alive, pressing inward. Suddenly, the stretcher let out a loud, metallic clang, as if something heavy had slammed onto it. Musa stumbled back, nearly falling over a cart. "What is happening?" he cried, his voice cracking. Helen's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. "We can't stay here. It wants me, but it'll take all of you too if we don't leave." "How are we supposed to leave?" IFA snapped, his panic rising. "The door won't open, and we're trapped with whatever this is." The temperature dropped even further, their breaths now visible in the dim light of the emergency bulbs. A sudden, deafening bang came from the far corner of the room, followed by an eerie silence. Benga's voice quivered as he whispered, "What do you want?" For a moment, there was no response, only the sound of their shallow breathing. Then, from the shadows, a deep, distorted voice echoed through the room. "She is mine." Helen screamed, backing away from the voice. "No. You can't have me. I don't belong to you." The shadows began to shift, coalescing into a tall, menacing figure with glowing, fiery eyes. It loomed over the group, its presence suffocating. The growling returned, this time louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy, dragging footsteps. Musa, trembling uncontrollably, grabbed IFA's arm. "We have to do something. We can't just stand here. If we don't move now, we're dead," IFA agreed, his voice shaking. Benga stepped forward, his fear replaced by a strange determination. "Get behind me," he ordered. "I'll distract it. You two take Helen and find another way out." "Are you crazy?" Musa hissed. "You'll get yourself killed. Just go." Benga shouted. The creature snarled, its fiery eyes narrowing as it turned its focus to Benga. Helen hesitated, her eyes darting between Benga and the others. "No. I can't leave him. You have to." IFA grabbed her arm. "We'll come back for him, but we need to get out of here before it's too late." As the creature lunged toward Benga, Musa, IFA, and Helen sprinted toward the far wall, desperately searching for another exit. The room seemed to twist and shift around them, the shadows closing in. "Over there!" Musa shouted, pointing to a narrow maintenance door barely visible in the dim light. Helen reached the door first, her hand shaking as she tried to turn the handle. It gave way, and the door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow passage. "Go! Go!" IFA urged, pushing Helen through. Musa followed, glancing back to see Benga standing his ground, facing the monstrous figure. "Benga!" Musa called out. "Just keep going." Benga yelled over his shoulder. "I'll hold it off." The door slammed shut behind them, and they were plunged into the darkness of the passage. Helen's sobs echoed through the narrow space as they stumbled forward, the faint sound of growling and Benga's shouts fading behind them. "What now?" Musa panted, his heart racing. IFA shook his head, trying to steady his breathing. "We keep moving. We find a way out. And we don't stop for anything." Helen's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not over, it will never be over." The trio stumbled through the narrow passage, the sound of their hurried steps echoing off the cold, metallic walls. The oppressive air from the morgue seemed to follow them, a chilling reminder that whatever they had just escaped was still lingering. Helen's breathing was ragged, her voice trembling. "You don't understand, it won't stop until it has me. You should have left me there." "We're not leaving you," IFA snapped, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "We'll figure this out, but you're coming with us." The passage opened into another dimly lit corridor, one lined with abandoned medical equipment and flickering fluorescent lights. The air was heavy, and the faint scent of antiseptic mingled with something far more rancid. "Which way now?" Musa asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Helen paused, her head snapping toward the shadows at the far end of the hallway. "It's here," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "No, it can't be," Musa started, but a loud, metallic clang interrupted him, followed by the sound of scraping claws against the floor. The creature emerged from the darkness, its fiery eyes glowing like embers in the night. It was larger now, its twisted form filling the hallway as it advanced toward them. Run! IFA shouted, grabbing Helen's arm and pulling her forward. The three of them took off down the corridor, the creature's guttural growl echoing behind them. It moved unnaturally fast, its long, skeletal limbs dragging against the walls as it closed the distance. They rounded a corner and burst into a larger room, a storage area filled with towering shelves and scattered boxes. Musa slammed the door shut behind them, leaning against it as IFA frantically searched the room for another exit. "It's not going to hold," Musa cried as the door shook violently, the creature slamming against it with relentless force. "Over here!" IFA shouted, pointing to a rusted metal ladder leading to a hatch in the ceiling. Helen hesitated, her body trembling. "It's no use, it will find me." "It always does." "If you give up now, we all die," IFA snapped, grabbing her shoulders. "Do you want that? Do you want it to take all of us?" Helen's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, steeling herself. "I'm sorry. Let's go." Musa climbed the ladder first, forcing the hatch open with a loud creak. "Hurry," he called down as IFA helped Helen up the rungs. The door below splintered as the creature burst through, its fiery gaze locking onto them. It let out an ear-splitting roar, lunging toward the ladder just as IFA scrambled up after Helen. Musa reached down, grabbing IFA's hand and pulling him through the hatch. They slammed it shut just as the creature's claws scraped against the metal. They found themselves on the roof of the hospital, the night air cold and biting. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but the rooftop felt isolated, a world apart from the bustling streets below. "What now?" Musa asked, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "We keep moving," IFA said, looking around for another way down. Helen clutched her arms, her voice barely audible. "It won't stop. It's tied to me. Wherever I go, it will follow." Musa shook his head. "There has to be a way to stop it. Maybe we can fight it." "You don't fight something like that," Helen replied, her voice hollow. "You survive it, or you don't." Before they could respond, the hatch behind them buckled, the metal denting outward. The creature was relentless, its guttural growls echoing through the night as it tore at the barrier. "It's coming," IFA said, backing away. The hatch burst open, and the creature emerged, its fiery eyes blazing as it climbed onto the roof. Helen stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "This is my fight. It wants me, not you." "No," Musa shouted, grabbing her arm. "We're not letting you do this alone." "If you stay, you'll die," Helen said, her eyes pleading. "Go. Please." The creature let out a deafening roar, its form twisting and shifting as it advanced. Helen turned to face it, her fear replaced by a quiet resolve. "Go now," she screamed. Musa and IFA hesitated, but the intensity in Helen's eyes made them move. They ran toward the far edge of the roof, finding a fire escape and descending as quickly as they could. As they reached the ground, a blinding flash of light erupted from the rooftop, followed by a bone-chilling scream that echoed through the night. They looked up, but the rooftop was empty, no sign of Helen or the creature. The silence that followed was deafening, the city below unaware of the battle that had just taken place. Musa and IFA stood in stunned silence, their hearts heavy with grief and unanswered questions. "Do you think she?" Musa started, but his voice trailed off. "I don't know," IFA replied, his voice hollow. "But whatever happened, she saved us." The two men turned and walked into the night, leaving the hospital behind. But deep down, they both knew this wasn't the end. Some things, once awakened, could never truly be put to rest. Days turned into weeks, and life at the hospital continued as if nothing had happened. Musa and IFA returned to their shifts, but the weight of that night lingered heavily between them. They avoided the morgue and spoke little of Helen or the events that had transpired. Benga never returned. His disappearance was filed as unexplained, and no one seemed to question it too deeply. The hospital had its share of strange occurrences, and this was just one more mystery to be buried beneath bureaucracy and silence. One evening, As Musa mopped the now familiar hallways, he paused near a window overlooking the city. The skyline sparkled, a stark contrast to the shadows that seemed to forever linger in his mind. "IFA," he said quietly as his friend approached, pushing a cleaning cart. "Do you think it's over?" IFA didn't answer immediately. He leaned on the cart, staring out at the lights. "I don't think it's something we'll ever know for sure. But I think she gave us a chance to move on." Musa nodded, though his unease remained. "Do you ever feel like she's still out there, watching us?" IFA glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe she found peace. I hope she did." The two men stood in silence, the hum of the hospital around them a reminder that life went on, even after unspeakable horrors. As Musa turned to continue his work, he caught a faint reflection in the glass, a shadow, just for a moment, with eyes that burned like fire. He blinked, and it was gone. Without a word, he resumed mopping, his heart heavy but his resolve steady. Some things were better left in the past, even if they refused to stay there. And far above, on the rooftop of the hospital, the wind whispered through the darkness, carrying with it a faint, lingering presence. The end.